This is the Nike Alphafly 3. It no longer has next percent in the name. I've heard some rumors and speculation that even say Nike had to drop the next percent because the shoe isn't as good or isn't as fast as the previous models. So is this true or false? False. But what if you say, I don't believe you? Well, just take a look at the box. This is actually part of a broad change from Nike marketing to try to simplify product names that they implemented at the beginning of 2023. I guess just no one noticed until the Alphafly 3 came out. Okay, so the Alphafly 3 no longer has a next percent in its name. That is really just due to trying to clean up the naming conventions with the Nike running shoes. So I thought I'd make this video go over a little bit of the history over the last few years of how Nike running shoe names got to where they were, and then the change to more simplified naming. And to start, I think I'm going to go back to about 2016 in the time of pre-Super shoes and start with the naming conventions there and then work all the way through where we are now. So if you go back to 2016, Nike had most of the fast running shoes had Zoom in the name, and that was due to the key technology at the time being the Zoom Air units that are in the midsole of the shoe. So that's the airbag inside the shoe called Zoom Air. So almost all the fast shoes for running had Zoom Air units in them. So that would have been like the Zoom Pegasus, Zoom Vomero, Zoom Elite, Zoom Structure. And with those, they would have had a number with those because those are all shoes that have been around for quite some time. So I think it was Pegasus 33 at the time, Vomero 11. So the name would be Nike Zoom Pegasus 33. I think that all made sense at the time. They also had other shoes that fell into different categories within the range, like the Nike Free series. So there was multiple different shoes that had Free in the name. There was also Lunar shoes that had Lunar in the name. But the Zoom shoes, those were the faster shoes. Those were the ones with the Zoom Air technology. So then you get into 2017. That's the year they released the Vaporfly 4%. With the Vaporfly 4%, that was obviously Nike's newest, fastest shoe. It did not have Zoom Air. So that was a pretty big change from where they had been in the past. What Nike ended up doing was going with the name Zoom X for the foam. So this still was a Zoom shoe. So you can see on the tongue, the name at the time was Nike Zoom Vaporfly 4%. That went along with the Nike Zoom Pegasus 34 and the Nike Zoom Fly. So all of these shoes had Zoom in the name because they were the running shoes, the faster shoes from Nike. But they all had very different technologies. So the Pegasus had Cushlon foam and Zoom Air. The Vaporfly 4% had Zoom X foam and a carbon plate. And then the Zoom Fly had Lunarlon foam and a nylon infused plate. So essentially completely different technologies. They were all united under that Zoom name. And that was back in 2017 when this was released. So I think that kind of iterated on itself. The other thing to note with that is somewhere along the line, another portion of the name was added on based on the upper. So I think this kind of had been around for a while, but I think it became even more prevalent somewhere around that time period where you could have a shoe that had a fly knit upper, so that would go into the name. So like the second version of the Vaporfly 4% was then called the Nike Zoom Vaporfly 4% Fly Knit. Similarly, on the shoes like the Pegasus and many others, you could have a Nike Zoom Pegasus 35. You could have a standard version, a Fly Ease version, a Shield version, a Gore-Tex version. All of those were really just different uppers on the same shoe. So that ended up being a shoe that essentially had 5 different components of the name. So it was the brand, the technology, the model, the version number, and then the upper. So you can see this is getting a little bit confusing, but I guess it didn't get better. It got a little bit worse. So that continued along. With that, I think there was a lot more knowledge around the Zoom X foam, so that had become more of a prevalent name within the kind of nomenclature of what Nike was using, as well as Zoom Air and differentiating between the two. I think trying to combine those two things back together in 2020 when the Nike Alphafly was released, the first version, they also released the Tempo, the Nike Tempo at the same time. So at that time, the Vaporfly had gone from a 4% to a next percent. And when they released the Alphafly and the Tempo, they reunited the race shoes under one common name called the Next Percent series. So I think a lot of people ended up calling the Vaporfly Next Percent a Next Percent, as that was the name of the shoe. That really wasn't correct. That was the name of the series of shoes. So there was the Nike Air Zoom Tempo Next Percent, there was the Nike Zoom X Vaporfly Next Percent, and then the Nike Air Zoom Alphafly Next Percent. So again, essentially they added another section into the name there. Some of the shoes still within that had a version number, so it was on the Next Percent 2, it got a 2 in there, as well as if it had a different upper, it would get a name added on for the upper. So there was the Tempo Next Percent Flyknit, there was the Tempo Next Percent Fly Ease, a lot of names. Got pretty confusing. That started to trickle down into all of the rest of the shoes where it had the cushioning technology as well as a line or a series that the shoe was in. So there was the Run line in addition to the Next Percent line. So you could even have daily trainer shoes that had names like Nike Zoom X Invincible Run 2 or Nike React Infinity Run 3 Flyknit. Very long, essentially very confusing names when it came down to it. So I think the intent was to try to help consumers understand which lineup it fit into and which technology was being used. But really at some point along the way, it ended up getting to be just overwhelming and challenging for anyone to remember the names. So I think it would be somewhere along the development cycle for the 2023 shoes, the decision was made to simplify the names. So I think this Invincible Run 3 is a good example of one that likely was developed somewhere in the middle of that decision making. You can see on the side it says Nike Invincible Run 3, so that still has several names in it. On this side it says Nike Zoom X Invincible Run 3, so then that has the cushioning technology in there, and then also on the heel clip it actually says Nike Zoom X Invincible Flyknit Run 3. So that again, that has the upper. That, you know, multiple different ways, very confusing. What actually ended up being on the website or the app, and what you can see right now today is Nike Invincible 3. Same with the Nike Vaporfly 3. Including all of the press material for the Vaporfly. That's how it was named. But for some reason, really, it seemed like not a lot of people picked up on that until the Alphafly 3 came out. So the Alphafly followed the same naming convention with the simplified naming on the website and all of the press materials, just calling it the Alphafly 3. I think it is interesting to note that on the back end in the Nike systems, it still is a Next Percent shoe. You can see that right on the shoebox. It says Alphafly Next Percent 3. But for everything that is public facing or consumer facing, it says Alphafly 3. And if you scroll through the Nike app, you can see that similar on just about all of the shoes have been simplified to just say the brand, the name of the shoe, and then the number if it is a shoe that has had multiple iterations. That's gone pretty well across all of the road running shoes. There are still some exceptions out there, especially within the trail line. The Gore-Tex shoes with that, which that's another brand name, so they want to have the Gore-Tex name in there. And then probably most notably on the track spikes, they have not changed any of those names. Those all still say Zoom or Air Zoom or, you know, any other multiple different variations on that. But on the road shoes, Alphafly 3, Vaporfly 3 included, as well as almost all the daily trainers, names are much more simplified. So I hope that clears things up. Long iteration that ended up going from somewhat simple names to very long and somewhat confusing names within the last few years, and then in 2023 and now into 2024, Nike has gone back to very simplified names with just the brand, the shoe name, and the number. All right, that is it for the video. I hope that was interesting, and thank you for watching.